Hi, this is Daryl Myatt from Keller, Texas. Today is Monday, January 17th, 2011. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Let's have a look at what's going on today. Looks like it's official now. This first story out of Israel Today, which I've also seen this story on several other sites, but this says, report, the virus attacking Iran nuclear program is from Israel. The New York Times reported rather conclusively over the weekend that the super advanced computer virus that has at least partially crippled the Iranian nuclear program was developed and tested by Israel with American involvement. Known as the Stuxnet, the virus was first identified in the wild about 2 years ago. Of course, I brought you the story about the Stuxnet virus wreaking havoc on Iran's nuclear facilities a few months back. About 1 year ago, it infected the computers that control the uranium enrichment plant at Natanz in central Iran. By all accounts, Stuxnet has to date managed to knock out 984 centrifuges and has, according to Israeli officials, set back Iran's nuclear program by a good 3 to 5 years. Didn't fire a shot, and somehow set back their nuclear program by 3 to 5 years. This reminds me of a verse in the Bible. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 9, verse 18. It says, wisdom is better than weapons of war. Yeah, you can always find something in the Bible that's relevant to anything. Anyway, I just think this is incredibly brilliant. For one thing, okay, first of all, Iran says they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They want to wipe them out completely, to utterly destroy them. Okay, and they want to pursue nuclear technology for peaceful purposes only. And gosh, we're not pursuing weapons. Well, clearly now the world knows they are pursuing a nuclear bomb. And as soon as they get it, you know they're going to use it on Israel. So, in short of a preemptive strike, Israeli scientists and smart guys all over the place came up with this Stuxnet virus, and it has given Iran fits all over the place for their whole nuclear program. I'm not going to go on and read all of this story because it pretty much explains what they did, how they did it, and how they came to basically slow down Iran's nuclear pursuits by 3 to 5 years. Anyway, I'm thrilled. Didn't fire a single shot, and yet protecting themselves and buying themselves some more time. This story's been all over the place. It's also in Arutz Sheva. It says Israel tested the Stuxnet worm with U.S. cooperation, says the New York Times. They basically reconstructed Iran's centrifuges in Dimona, where it tested the Stuxnet worm that has set back Iran's nuclear program at least 5 years, according to this story. The New York Times reported this Sunday. Anyway, here's how it began. It was Israel was trying to get the go-ahead from George W. Bush to launch bombs and missiles against Iran and to take out their nuclear facilities, and George Bush said, no, can't give you the green light for that. So they came up with this project, and apparently it has worked quite well, because if you think about it, if they had done a military strike, it would probably delay their progress by about the same time frame, 3 to 5 years. Of course, going this route, they're not going to have the rest of the world screaming at them, talking about killing innocent people and things like that. And I'm all for a peaceful way instead of all-out war. Not a big fan of war, but we know there's a few coming. The Bible's pretty clear on that. But I just want to take a moment and applaud the Israeli scientists and the people that came up with this Stuxnet worm to slow Iran down in their pursuit for destruction of Israel, in their pursuit for trying to usher in the 12th Imam, or Mahdi, by ushering in global chaos, doing so most likely with nuclear weapons. So, Kudos to you, Israel. Well done. Well done. Okay, you want another Bible verse? Let's go to Proverbs 2, and let's go to verse 12 through 15. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse, who leave the straight paths to walk in dark ways, who delight in doing wrong and rejoice in the perverseness of evil, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. You know, if you say you're going to wipe somebody off the face of the earth, I don't care who you are and who you're saying you're going to wipe out, that probably makes you wicked or evil. I mean, even if you took the most evil, wicked, sinful group of people in the world and said you're going to wipe them out, you'd be a murderer. Plain and simple. The Bible says, thou shalt not kill. God doesn't like us to kill. Anyway, let's move on. This next story out of Depka.com says Nasrallah on course for an anti-West government backed by Assad. In his first speech on the Lebanese crisis, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said Sunday night, January 16th, the opposition will exercise its own national convictions and will not be intimidated by the world's reaction. He added, the opposition had decided unanimously not to name Saeed Hariri, the pro-Western prime minister they toppled last week, as next head of government, meaning that the Hezbollah-led camp will build its own regime, shunning Hariri. Nasrallah and Hariri will certainly go head-to-head to decide which one rules the country. Wow. Depka Files sources note that Hezbollah has the advantage of being the most powerful armed force in Lebanon. Okay, so here we go. Hezbollah trying to take over the whole country of Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah is an arm of Iran, trying to position themselves just north of Israel so they can have a very close base to launch their bombs and their missiles in the event of hoping to destroy Israel completely. That's their goal. That is their goal. Here's something out of Haaretz. Palestinians to submit a UN draft condemning Israeli settlements this week. The Palestinians hope the United Nations body will pass a resolution condemning Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank. Okay, I'm sorry, I got to say, catch-22 here, or they're doing the same thing. They're condemning Jewish-only settlements, yet they've made it clear. When they get a Palestinian state, not one Jew will live in there. Not one. They'll kill them, they'll expel them, they won't allow them. But here they are condemning the Jewish people for having Jewish-only settlements. It's not that they're not allowing Palestinians, it's Palestinians don't want to live there. A little different. Anyway, says Chief Palestinian Negotiator Saeb Erekat said today that the Palestinian Authority expected to ask the United Nations Security Council this week to declare Israeli settlements illegal and demand a halt to their construction. Erekat said the request is likely to be submitted by Wednesday, on the day that the Security Council holds its monthly meetings on Middle East issues. As the Palestinians have only observer status at the United Nations, the resolution will be presented by a full member of the Council. Erekat says the Palestinians will hold more consultations at the United Nations later Monday and hope to win the support of 14 of the Council's 15 members. Erekat says U.S. officials urged the Palestinians not to go to the Security Council over settlements. He says he does not know whether the U.S. will veto the settlement resolution. He urged the Obama administration not to do so. We'll see how that plays out. Weeks of intensive U.S. diplomatic efforts to revive direct peace talks between Abbas and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu collapsed when Israel refused to extend a 10-month partial building freeze in the West Bank. Nearly 500,000 Jews live on land captured by Israel in the Six-Day War, where the Palestinians want to found a state that would also include the Gaza Strip, separated from the West Bank. So there's 500,000 Jews that will be displaced, moved, killed, whatever means necessary, if this does happen. Okay, here's something out of Pravda.ru. The UN top priorities for 2011. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon outlines the United Nations Organization's 8 top priorities for the year. Okay, Ban Ki-moon predicts that 2011 will be even more challenging in 2010 and calls on the unrelenting determination of the international community. Okay, so the top 8 priorities for the UN, as laid out by Ban Ki-moon in his address to the UN General Assembly last Friday, are sustainable development, climate change, empowerment of women, a safer world, well, there's a good one, advancing human rights, responding to major humanitarian crisis, disarmament, and non-proliferation, and strengthening the UN. That's some of their goals. Sounds pretty vague with some of their descriptions, but for the most part I would say those are probably pretty reasonable and worthy things to try to achieve. Let's see how successful they are in doing so. We'll know at the end of next year. Here's kind of an eye-opener. This story out of english.aram.org. Actually, I saw this on CNN also, so it's kind of all over the place. Venezuela now surpasses Saudi Arabia in oil reserves. I know people are like, what? Venezuela more oil than Saudi Arabia? Says Venezuela might have the largest oil reserves, but the technology needed to pump its ultra-heavy crude is much more complicated and expensive than the Saudis' light oil machinery. Okay, it says Venezuela has overtaken Saudi Arabia as the world leader in oil reserves, with certified deposits leaping to 297 billion barrels at the end of 2010. The oil's a little different though. It's really thick, and they have to mix it with other oil or use high-tech machinery to get it to where it's more usable, as opposed to the Saudi Arabian oil, which is much lighter and easier to manage, easier to pump, easier to turn into whatever else they need to turn it into. But a little bit of, it's a little concerning. You know, of course, Venezuela calls America the Great Satan and Israel the Little Satan, and Venezuela has just recently become really good friends with Iran. Not the best, not the best combo for Americans. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Okay, been talking about suffering. I'm still continuing in this strain. In Genesis 37, verse 3 through 4, it talks about Joseph. It says, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children, but his brothers hated Joseph. Okay, Joseph's biblical biography begins on a rather strange note. I mean, we're told that he was his father's favorite son, and that this fact wasn't lost on his 10 older brothers. Now, eventually Joseph's brothers decided enough was enough. They took out their frustrations on him by throwing him into a pit, and when a caravan of traders passed by, they decided to sell their brother into slavery. That's pretty cruel. It was a transaction that would signal years of imprisonment, hardship, and suffering for Joseph. You can read about this in Genesis 37 and Genesis 39. But fast forward several years and a few things have changed. Okay, there's now a famine that's gripped the region, and Joseph has risen to prominence in Egypt, where there was an abundance of grain. Now, if you read the story, you'll see how he made this transaction, how he rose to power through a series of events that could only be described as godness. Joseph's brothers were forced to kneel before him and beg for food. Now, what followed was a true tale of redemption and restoration, as Joseph was reunited with the brothers who had once hated him. You can read that in Genesis 40 through 45. Now, it may not seem obvious at first, but this account offers us a really deep insight to suffering. You see, if Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would have avoided a lot of hardship, but there would have still been this strife between him and his brothers. But the season of suffering that he went through opened the door for a deeper work of reconciliation to take place. You know, in many cases, God has prescribed a season of suffering because He knows that it will accomplish a much deeper work that could never happen if things just stayed the same. Such seasons don't always make sense to us at the time, but in the long run, we can see their wonderful worth. So don't always cry out to God if you're in a season of suffering, because sometimes it's God's way of making something work for your good. God bless you. Hope to see you again tomorrow.